welcome to Fish and Rice, Stories from Japan. I'm Toby.
I'm Andri.
And today we have our new guest on the podcast, Matt. Thank you very much for coming.
Thank you for inviting me.
You're our very first guest coming to talk about entrepreneurship a little bit here in Japan and starting your own company. And you have a very special company because you own a very cool retro game bar here in Osaka. Before we dive into this, could you introduce yourself a little bit to our listeners?
Right. My name is Matthew Block. I'm from Maryland, USA. I've been living in Japan since 2006. And my business, a video game bar named Space Station, it opened in 2011, and it's 12 years old this month.
Congratulations.
Thank
12
you
years running a bar, that's quite a long feat.
I was proud of it.
How did you get interested into retro gaming, and what inspired you to open this bar here in Osaka?
Well, as you might guess, video gaming is my favorite pastime. It has always been my favorite pastime. I would say I started young, 5 years old or so. I'm 46 right now, so 1981, I get my first video game console, an Atari 2600, for my 6th birthday. And that's how I got into gaming. So I was playing the retro games as a kid, of course, before they were retro. Or when they were current, right? Before they were retro.
That's really cool. And you kind of stuck with it all the way through. And now, of course, the video game scene has changed quite a lot, online games and so on. But you still prefer or enjoy more playing the retro games?
I consider myself a consummate gamer, as in I like the old and the new and everything in between. So I don't consider myself a retro gamer at all. I like it all.
You like it all. And then what pushed you to open this one business focused on retro games here in Osaka?
Well, for clarity, I guess it is fair to say it's a retro game bar in one way, but I don't have a problem with that at all. And when you walk into Space Station, it definitely feels retro, but I tried to strike a balance. And there is a fair amount of representation for modern games as well.
So it's more for a space for a community that love games and wants to kind of share this while having a drink and just enjoying a good time all together at Space Station.
Yeah, that's fair to say.
What do you play at your bar? Do you play at your bar?
I actually don't, or rarely. And the reason I rarely play is because I actually prefer single-player gaming. I'm an only child, and I grew up playing single-player games mostly. And to be completely honest, I really still, to this day, have a problem with losing to other people. So I generally avoid multiplayer gaming. And if customers want me to play a casual game of Mario Kart, for example, I'll do it, but I don't really enjoy it. I prefer the single-player experience, but of course I made a bar for multiplayer experiences, but it's very well balanced with single-player stuff. And a lot of the multiplayer stuff is actually cooperative. The recommended games in the bar, the most notable one is a game called Ibn Ab. It was from the Netherlands, made in 2013, an indie game, and I absolutely love showing this game to customers. It's a cooperative game that has mass appeal and is very accessible for people that are all the way from people who have no experience with video games or are intimidated just to hold a controller, understandably, all the way up to people who grew up with video games. This one cooperative two-player game, Ibn Ab, just almost all customers get into it if I can persuade, especially the ones that are shy about games or uninterested.
Just give it a try.
Give it a try.
Yeah. That's
huge
really cool.
Success rate with that game.
I can imagine that setting up this bar or this to set up Space Station wasn't something that happened overnight or something easy. There were probably quite a few administrative challenges. Can you walk us a little bit through the process that it took you to bring your idea to life?
I'll backtrack a bit and try to answer that other question a little more. I was a customer at a video game bar in Amerikamura.
The American Village in Osaka.
American Village in the Namba Shinsaibashi area of Osaka City. That bar was called Continue, and I was a customer there for about a year. Shoebox of a bar, but my mind was blown the first time I went in there, and I had never known of a video game bar at that time, except for maybe the Mana Bar, which also made a name for itself in Australia. I think the Mana Bar started in Brisbane, and expanded to Melbourne, or vice versa. So those were the only two video game bars I knew at the time, and Continue was the only one I had access to. Really enjoyed it. 1 year of being a customer there, it simply occurred to me one day, I happened to be swimming laps at the time, it simply occurred to me that I should do one. It would be perfect for someone like me to do one. And once that connection was made, it was very rapid where all the ideas came to me as to what my video game bar would look like what my execution on the concept of the video game bar would be. And that means not just the curation of the games, but I had a clear picture of that, what games I would have and what games I wouldn't have, but also a pretty clear picture in my mind's eye about what the decor would be like, what games would be represented with the decoration around the bar ideally, and what I would exclude. And because I had such a clear picture in my mind, I attribute that to what enabled me to actually see it through. I gave myself like a 2-year deadline if I was going to do it at all. It's kind of arbitrary. I said, by the time I'm 35, I want it done. And it was quite intimidating. And I didn't know if I would really follow through. There's so many people, whatever the business may be, they say they want to do it. And I would say the majority don't follow through, of course. And
the idea is like enticing. Oh, I can see myself doing something, but then you realize, well, the mountain of work you have to go through to actually execute on your idea. You need to start looking for partners. You need to think maybe about financing. In your case, you had to look for a place as well, and possibly, I assume, since you're selling alcohol as well at the bar, get some license to sell alcohol, and more things like that. Which one was the biggest challenge for you to overcome in that process?
Well, the challenge that didn't exist, that I enjoy telling people about, is that there's no liquor licensing in Japan.
Oh, so my previous comment was actually completely wrong.
Right.
Interesting.
Yeah, that's my understanding. Bars and restaurants, when they get their business license, they fall under the same designation of inshokuten. And there's no liquor license process involved, no money involved in that. It's amazing for people that come from most countries, I would assume, certainly the US. I don't know if other countries in Asia are as relaxed about alcohol as Japan is, but Japan is known even by people in other countries that have an interest in Japan that you could get alcohol from a vending machine. Though those vending machines are few and far between, they still exist. And I understand it's tightly regulated in other countries, especially Australia. I get a lot of Australians coming through, and they tell me how strict it is there. But I always tell them, when the subject comes up, I'm like, well, there's no liquor licensing here. I could run this bar 24 hours starting tomorrow.
Wow.
If I so decide. There's no one to notify. And I don't imagine I'd open a bar anywhere else. Japan just is relaxed in that way.
What about finding a location for your bar? Was this tricky? Where did you know in which area of Osaka you wanted to set yourself up, and finding a place maybe big enough? And was this a challenge or something? Yeah,
the vision I had for the bar involved a size. Like the picture I had, there was some certain size that would a sweet spot, not too small, not too big. I have a friend named Samantha. She runs a clothing shop named Samantha's Vintage in American Village.
Okay.
And she put me in touch with a real estate agent. And after looking at just 3 or 4 spots within Amerikamura, I was shown what is currently Space Station, and I could tell right away that's the size I wanted to work with, and the shape.
So it all clicked when you went there?
Yeah, so much clicked through this whole process, and that was one of the things.
You mentioned a little bit earlier that you had a very clear vision of the decor, but also the games. How many games do you have now, and how did you decide on which ones to get and where to source them from?
I started collecting US games, complete in box, I'd say 18, 19 years ago. Keeps getting longer, of course. I have to check my emails, which I keep from all the way back then, and see what these eBay emails were. But I started a collection of my own US games exclusively. I was never an import gamer, like living in the US, importing Japanese games. No, nothing like that. In fact, as a kid, I would only rent games. Never bought them. Owned the consoles, but rented the games. In any case, I started collecting my favorites 18 years ago, say. And when it came time to open Space Station, that was ready to go. I boxed everything up.
Just moved them from your from your home to the bar, basically.
That's right. And the Japanese stuff I acquired just a few months before I opened Space Station. Right next to Space Station, there used to be a retro goods, like otaku goods store called Mandarake.
Oh yeah, very big chain here in Japan.
Right, very big chain. They've since moved back. That's particular location. They moved location to their original, somewhere in Nipponbashi. But at that time, it was pretty much kismet, if that's the right word, or certainly fate in a way. That just a few months before I opened, Mandarake had a huge game junk matsuri, like game junk festival, on their event floor, the top floor. And I was able to buy up almost all the Japanese stuff in one go at a great price. And I had some sense of what would work in the bar, and I also looked at lists online of the top 10 most popular games for each console for the Japanese. And so, yeah, this U.S. collection combined with this haul I was able to get from Mandarake is still the bulk of the games there. And I added very slowly after that, and I haven't really added any cartridge-based game in a long time.
Any few unique pieces that are maybe rare to find that you're proud to have at your bar?
I don't have too much in the way of rarities. Because fortunately, the most popular games are still very common and so cheap to acquire. If I had rarities that were expensive, I'd worry about them disappearing.
Suddenly, one night after closing up, it's gone.
And I've had games go missing, about 12 in as many years, let's say, and that's...
It's quite sad, right? You spend a lot of time and effort to put the place together, and you hope that people just come to enjoy it, and suddenly they just take advantage of your efforts, basically.
Of course, that doesn't feel good. But not that I can say I'm happy with the amount of theft that occurred at Space Station. I think that's a good rate. I don't encourage anyone to come and change those numbers. But yeah, having lost 12 games in as many years, I can absorb that easily, and I can keep the system the way it is. As in, there's no library check-in, check-out system. Often customers might make the comment, oh, back in our country, there's no way you could have the games laid out this way without some checks and balances, like take an ID, for example. And yeah, the rate of loss, as I just described, is such that I can continue to function that way. All the games are within arm's reach. You change them yourself. Hopefully they work the first time you put them in. I do have some games that are out there for historical reasons, but again, they're not cheap. They're not expensive. The rarities I have are thanks to one friend of mine who's a collector, and he might have some homebrew games that are made into a physical copy.
Okay.
Like there might be some fan-made Sonic game for the NES.
That's really cool.
That never existed at the time, and it's fan-made. But there are companies out there that will take a ROM, data, and put it into a physical cartridge to resemble just the way they used to. And we have quite a few games out on the counter that are these homebrew games made to resemble the physical shape of the original
Yeah,
games from
that's
30
really
years
cool
ago.
from the community, right? Brings people together as well. Just inject some new ideas into old classics, and I imagine it's quite a widespread community in the area, right? Do you have any idea of how many game bars are in the, let's say, Osaka, Kobe, Kyoto area?
I used to keep a list once I learned about it, like the Kansai area, as you just mentioned. And whenever I learned of a new video game bar, I went to see it as soon as I could. I'm very interested still. But then they started popping up so frequently
Wow.
that I stopped keeping track.
Is it still the case?
What's that?
Is it still the case?
No.
Okay.
They've since plateaued. And the growth has stopped, I think. But I always use the number 30.
Okay. Well,
I don't know how accurate that is.
sweet
but
round number.
my feeling is there are 30 video game bars within the Kansai area.
Is there something that makes you really stand out to differentiate yourself from the others?
I certainly think so. And one of the main things is what I've already mentioned, in that I have the US games and the machines right next to the Japanese equivalent. And I don't believe there's a single video game bar. I take that back. There's almost no other video game bar in the country that has Kaigai-ban, like an overseas version, represented. It's all Japanese games. The exception happens to be a bar in Nagoya called Critical Hit, run by a friend of mine, also from the US, named Alex Fraioli. He used to be a games journalist.
Okay.
And in Critical Hit in Nagoya, there are US games as well.
But if someone who is listening to this podcast right now wants to play some foreign games in the original versions here in Japan, Space Station is the best place to go.
If they're in Osaka, yes, for sure.
Do you have any very fond memories? Now 12 years is a long time of running a bar, and we hope you have many more to go so we can also come and enjoy the atmosphere. But from those 12 years, is there any moments or events that really stand out to you?
When I first got the idea to make the bar and all the vision came to me of how it should be, I also imagined what I might be able to experience if the bar is viable, if the bar does well. And a lot of that came to pass. One example is how I got to participate in a panel at a video game convention. Right, these video game conventions, PAX East specifically, Penny Arcade Expo, if you guys are familiar with it. If not, I'm sure some of the listeners are. I had the pleasure and the distinction to be on a panel in 2014, a 5-member panel, in a room, one of the rooms of the convention center. It's seated 700, and the name of the panel was Rise of the Geek Bar. So it's where I got to, along with 4 other people that are doing the same thing, I got to talk about a lot of what I'm talking about with you now. And it was an absolute pleasure. And I was hoping that by doing this bar, I would have the opportunity, it would please me, to be on a panel at a video game convention. And that came to pass 3 years after I opened Space Station.
That's really cool.
And yes, besides that, over the years, I have gotten to meet people that are connected to the industry in some way, and it's an absolute pleasure to meet some of these people. Just 2 days ago, I was working, and a guy named Hassan, I forgot his last name, came through, and he told me he runs the Nationale Video Game Museum in the Netherlands.
Okay, that's quite a big museum, must be.
Yeah, Video Game History Museum, and you can be sure my curiosity was well piqued. He encouraged me to look it up, and while I was working, I looked it up, the monitor behind the bar counter, I displayed it, and he said, look at all the photos, and yes, it is substantially, the size is very large, and it looked absolutely gorgeous, and comprehensive, like Video Game History Museum. It goes all the way back to the 70s, if not earlier, all the way up to modern, and I loved what I saw, and I was absolutely thrilled to meet the guy that heads that up.
I guess if you run a social place like Space Station, you get to meet a lot of very interesting people with a common interest, in this case for video games, but also maybe just people that come from all kinds of backgrounds and from all over the world into Osaka to share the pleasure of like playing games. You mentioned before it's ever-growing industry and changing and new games coming in, and that you stopped buying games quite a while ago, but that you still try to make it a place where people that enjoy more recent games can come have a good time, and also people who like very retro games. You mentioned the NES. How do you manage to keep up with this changing world of video games?
The short answer to that is I don't. The longer answer is, as I alluded to earlier, I rarely add another game. The retro games, I'm pretty satisfied with what's there. There's not really any gap in the collection that I feel I need to address. As far as modern games go, I add them, like when I get a game for myself, for whatever reason, if I think it will suit the bar, like my Steam library, say, anything computer-based, like Epic Games library. If I think it'll suit the bar, I make it accessible. Like I have Family View on my Steam collection.
Okay.
So that's how I curate that. I might have my Steam libraries, not even 400 games. And of course, that's a lot of games, but people that love games, they might have a library in the thousands. But of those 350 games, let's say, I've only made 40 or so accessible to bar patrons. And it's rare that I find a game that I think will suit the bar. But when I add a game, it's like that.
It's
Something
because
like
it
that.
really makes sense to kind of complete the collection, extend the collection.
Collection. What more did I want to say about that?
Do you sometimes also then create special events for playing games where, let's have a game night around this game, and all the people that want to play, you mentioned Mario before, but you have a lot of Sonic games, that everyone comes for a Sonic night, or do you have other themed nights at the bar?
In the past, we used to have the occasional tournament. And to this day, we have at least one video game quiz night a year. 2 at the most. And I usually attach it to the bar's anniversary, which will be at the end of this month. And we just do a video game pub quiz. And every year it's a different quiz master from my customer base. People like to be quiz master, come up with their own trivia. It goes back to my preferences where I prefer single player gaming, and the idea of tournaments, I don't like tournaments. It's too intense for me. And of course, I want to give the customers what they want. If they want tournaments, and we did in the past. I left it in the hands of someone who likes running tournaments, but even then it was very rare. And we haven't really done a tournament in a long, long time. It's just a reflection of my own relationship, my own preferences to gaming. I just don't enjoy tournaments, so I'm not motivated to organize them. And I don't have too many customers coming to me, like locals, saying, let's really do this. So I have no motivation to do them. I'm sorry, what was the question?
From your customers that are coming, would you say the majority is like a local crowd, or is it a lot of foreigners coming in to visit the space station, or how would you define your customer base?
It has gradually and then abruptly shifted from it mostly being locals, as you might expect in the beginning when the bar's not known, to it being almost all travelers.
Okay. That's a lot of travelers.
We certainly have regulars. But boy, it's hard to get in that bar sometimes, and it's full of travelers. And especially now when Japan is dealing with, like the rest of the world, any country that's popular to travel to, we're dealing with 2 or 3 years of pent-up tourism all descending on the country at one time. So
how many people can you fit in the bar at once?
I give it in the ballpark of 30.
Okay.
Standing room, and it's not a comfortable 30.
Yes.
But it can be enjoyed.
That's like a party atmosphere.
A club atmosphere, a party atmosphere. It amazes me sometimes. Let's say there's 25 people in the bar already. Really, it's not easy to get in, and a group of 8 will come up. Almost certainly they'll go back down. It's simply not. It won't be as fun. But sometimes that group of 8 stays, and they just pack themselves in, and we're overwhelmed.
Good for business as well.
Good for business, yeah.
So from all these people that come to have a good time, and do you feel like there's a shift in generations? Is it more older people, younger people that come to enjoy games? And what would you say is the biggest appeal now for retro games, especially in the modern world?
Right, I would say the demographics haven't changed. Just people in their 20s to 40s.
Okay.
That's how it's been.
Always been.
Yeah, I think so.
What's the appeal for retro games for this generation, especially maybe the slightly on the early 20s side, who may not have known those games when they were not yet retro? What do you see attracts them in the?
Off the top of my head, I don't know if I can formulate an answer for that one. A lot of modern games in the indie scene, especially, have a retro aesthetic, and those are very popular. And there's so many good ones. The people in their 20s that make it a point to go back to the original 80s games, 90s games, I don't know how numerous they are. They might be quite numerous or not. I just don't know. And I don't know why do they want to go back to those. Some games have aged better than others. There's obvious motivations for why you would want to go back. If you're a film buff, for example, you love the medium of cinema or film so much, then you're a film major or something, then I guess you would likely have an interest in the history of cinema and be interested in its evolution and like a lot of old movies, or at least have an interest in them. So I assume like people in the games industry that are similarly into the medium of video games, that group of people would perhaps go back and enjoy the 80s and 90s games. So there's that group at least. Beyond that, I'm sure there's plenty of people that still enjoy the 20-somethings, let's say, who enjoy 80s and 90s games. But even if they don't make it a point to go back to them, in my opinion, they're not missing much. They're missing something historically, I guess, but they're not missing much because there are a lot of games now, again, with that feel about them, even though they might not exactly feel as crude or rough as the 80s games, unless they somehow try to make it a point to to feel that way. But still, there's enough just in the graphics alone that can give you a sense that this is a retro game, even though it isn't.
So is it a trend in the gaming industry, perhaps, that makers are purposely making games look like they're retro with similar functionalities and interactions in the game, although the games were actually produced now, let's say in the 2023 or...
Yeah.
Is this a trend you think is going to stay, or what is the future looking for retro games in your opinion?
Well, I think on the graphics side anyway, it will stay because it's easier to make a game that's lo-fi on the graphics side. So out of necessity, games will still have that look. And then they can lean into the fact that we're so retro. But again, those games are so common and abundant.
So I want to move to maybe a last section for the podcast episode. And I was wondering if you'd have any specific advice to give to someone who's interested in opening a bar, especially a retro game bar here in Japan.
I hope if you open a retro game bar in Japan, it's not too close to mine. And if that's the case, then I hope it was as smooth for you as it was for me, because it was surprisingly smooth.
A lot of things can easily go wrong in the process, and so I think maybe doing some research will be always useful. But then, a little bit of luck maybe as well.
Certainly, luck is always a factor in most anything. Well, I will mention that when I got it into my head to open my own bar, which I accomplished in 14 months, by the way, or 16. I gave myself 2 years, as I said, just an arbitrary deadline, and I actually made it happen in a year and a half, say. So good on me for that. But the moment I decided I would attempt to open a bar of my own, I immediately got a job working at a bar, also in Amemura, and by virtue of doing that for 10 months, I got to know people and people got to know me. So when it came time to open my own place, I had a few people holding my hand through the process.
And also maybe a first customer base already when you started. They knew you were opening the bar, they came right over.
Right.
Do you have any now upcoming collaborations or promotions for Space Stations, for if some of our listeners would like to come have a drink and play some games? I know you have the anniversary coming up in a couple of weeks. Anything else you'd like to share maybe?
I don't believe so. I don't have... Space Station doesn't have any collaborations per se. If I was to mention anything, it would be... I'm a partner at another bar called the Soundgarden.
Oh, yes.
So while it's
Very
not
nice
a collab...
place.
Oh, yeah?
Yes,
You've been there?
I've been there before, yes.
Wonderful. I'm one of the partners there, and there's never been a collaboration between Space Station and the Soundgarden. It never seemed to make sense, but there might be something there that we could explore, perhaps, in which case we would. I mean, I will say that at the Soundgarden, there is a Pong arcade cabinet, like a modern reimagining of the historical and classic game of Pong in a sit-down table-style arcade cabinet. I initially intended it for Space Station, but space is always a concern there, and I couldn't get it to fit into Space Station, but the Soundgarden's quite big. So it's on loan from Space Station. I don't know if I'll ever take it back, but we have an arcade cabinet in the Soundgarden.
Very cool.
With plenty of space for more. And we always tinker with the idea of making a barcade, more of a barcade at the Soundgarden. That may or may never happen. But that's the closest thing I can think of that resembles a collaboration.
Yeah, the retro gaming machines can take up space, especially if it's like an arcade game. So you need to plan for that. Talking maybe about arcades and some of our listeners coming to Japan, coming to Osaka and wanting to have a gaming experience. If not for stopping by Space Station, where would you recommend them to go to have a retro gaming experience here in Osaka?
Well, the name that is most well known is a retro game store called Super Potato.
Super Potato.
In Nipponbashi, right? Also known as Denden Town, the equivalent of Tokyo's Akihabara. For those who know, like the electronics district in Tokyo, Akihabara. We have our own in Osaka called Denden Town. And there is the most famous chain of video game stores called Super Potato. It's not known favorably for its prices. It's thought to be overpriced, but it's one of the few games, pun intended, I guess, in town. There used to be a lot more retro game stores, but over time, these emerged to the top. Super Potato and now Game Tanteidan comes to mind.
Oh, very nice.
As two shops. I'll mention it even though it's kind of moot, but there used to be an amazing retro arcade. There was a retro arcade called, the name escapes me, but it was Western style. This Japanese,
like very original.
The originals mostly are Atari cabinets, arcade cabinets, stand-up type, like we're used to in the West, not the sit-down candy cabs they're called, that are common in Japan. So this Japanese guy just loved importing Western arcade games from the 80s and had it set up. It was only open on Sundays.
Only Sundays.
For quite a few years, and now it's gone. And Tokyo never had anything like that. I was beside myself, like, oh, by the way, I'll mention here, I guess, that the reason the bar is called Space Station is because that was my childhood arcade. That was the name of my childhood arcade. There was only one arcade in my town as a child, and it was called Space Station. I had a few birthday parties there.
Good memories.
Yes, the best. So when I walked into this place, and it reminded me of Space Station, but it's all gone now. I will mention there's an amazing pinball arcade / museum, I call it, called Silver Ball Planet. just 5 minutes walk from Space Station.
So it's all in the maybe south, not south of Osaka, but around the Namba, Shinsaibashi, and Denden Town area.
Yeah.
And Amimura,
Yeah.
of course.
This place opened up a few years after Space Station. It has over 100 pinball machines, and it's a wonder to behold. Tokyo, comparing Osaka to Tokyo again. Tokyo has nothing like it, Silver Ball Planet, and it's just a happy coincidence that it exists so close to Space Station. Happy to have it there. Like a lot of gamers, I've never been into pinball. There's plenty of pinball fans, but it's far more niche than the world of video games. But still, going into this place with pinball games from the 1970s, the late 70s, all the way up to modern, because they're still being made. They're just amazing pieces of art, functional artwork, right? And highly recommended. Silver Ball Planet. Space Station had its 4th anniversary there. The only time we've had an event off-site was there.
Thank you for sharing all those cool recommendations and for coming today. Before we move on to Andrew's trivia questions,
I'm nervous.
I wanted to ask you, maybe you could share where our listeners can find you on social media and Instagram, perhaps. I'm not sure which ones are you popular or are you using frequently.
Right. Space Station does little to nothing in the way of social media. But we do have an Instagram video game bar, Space Station.
Okay.
Or I'm sorry, Space Station Osaka.
We'll link it down in the description
Thank
below.
you kindly.
And,
yeah, there are pictures of the interior there. There is a Facebook group. I forgot the name of it, but you can find us if you just Google Space Station Osaka.
And head straight to the door, and you'll be there greeting them.
Right. Correct.
Awesome.
I'm there most nights.
Then
all right, let's
do those questions. Andrew prepared a few trivia questions, as usual, 3.
3.
Oh,
Yes.
just 3. Ooh, okay,
Yeah.
go for it.
Not so many, and I feel intimidated now, as you said, that every year you have someone do this trivia in your bar, so I feel like you will just nail it, but we'll see how
Okay.
good Toby is with guessing
Our
numbers.
guessing numbers, yeah.
Or maybe you know something about games. Okay. There is a famous retro game called Pac-Man. Probably everyone played. I played it. And what year was it released first?
Okay, do you want me to say it or write it down?
Write it down first.
Pac-Man.
Pac-Man.
That sounds like someone who knows the answer.
Yeah,
I
got the answer
will
to that.
just guess one random number, and that will be far off, I guess.
Okay, so the expert goes first. Matt, please.
Oh, the answer right now.
Yes.
1980.
I said 1973, but
You have no chance,
I have
Toby.
no chance.
Let me add a little bit about that. The 40th anniversary was 2020.
Okay.
That's how I got that. And there's they released a sake. It's Oyama sake, and it's a Pac-Man bottle. 40th anniversary.
That's really cool. They love making those collaborations, right? here in
Right,
Japan.
Japan makes a lot of korabo, right?
Yeah.
That's true.
Pac-Man sake.
It's a beautiful label. I didn't know how limited of a run it would be. I still don't know. But in 2020, I bought up 35 bottles of this sake. And it's on the menu while supplies last. And I'm keeping all the bottles. I don't know if I'll do anything with them, but it would make for an interesting piece of decoration.
For sure. Very unique.
Nice. Okay, question number 2. Tetris is one of the most famous games, and it was released in 1984. So that is not the question. How many shapes were there in original
In the
Tetris?
original. Okay. I'll assume it's the same as now. Let me draw them out just so I can answer that.
Wait, if they come in different orientations, does it count as a different shape?
No, the same shape. If it's turned sideways, it's the same shape. Just
All of them.
I think I will say I have my number.
okay. Let's wait for Matt.
I don't want to mess this up. It'll upset me. I don't want to take too much dead air, make too much dead air either. Am I missing something?
Did I say?
Okay, I'll go with that.
All right. So please
Yes.
your answer.
I believe currently it's 6, and so I think it was 6 even back then.
Okay.
I picked 4.
4 shapes. Oh wow. What I found, it's 7 shapes.
Okay.
I had troubles finding exactly the shapes that they were.
Oh, I got it. You're right. It's 7. Oh, see, now I'm sad.
Ah,
the T block.
the T
I
block.
didn't draw that.
Oh.
Yes. Okay.
So 7
Well,
shapes.
Wrong one, so I couldn't come up with the T block.
Okay, the
Okay,
last
good
Tetris,
stuff.
what a classic.
Good stuff.
and the last question, my personal favorite game on Sega is Rock and Roll Racing, and I loved playing it. It was released on Sega in the US, and it was on Nintendo in Japan, as far as I know. And Sega Genesis, the release year is
Sega
Okay.
Genesis.
Sega Genesis for the US, correct?
US or Japan,
Or Japan?
either. Or
Okay.
if you can do both, then Toby has 0 chance.
Okay. I wonder if they're the same or not. Since you put it that way, it makes me think they're different.
They're
They are.
1 year apart.
Apart.
Oh,
Okay.
I'll just change my answer.
Okay, then
Just
I'll
make them 1 year apart.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
So what's your answer?
All right. Well, I believe it was 1989 in the States, so that would make it 88 in Japan.
Yes.
Well, I'm off again. I had 1983 and 1984.
Great. I used to play Sega a lot, and yeah, I included that in.
Great.
Yeah,
Questions?
it's a whole world of retro games out there and a lot of things to try and explore. My personal experience has been quite limited. I mean, I started probably with a Game Boy and Pokemon and some old Mario games or so on.
You're too young.
Yeah, maybe so. Thank you very much, Matt, for your time, for coming here to our little studio space and to sharing your experience with us. It was really interesting. I certainly learned a lot. I hope you had a good time.
Certainly did.
We'd love to have more guests like you come to the show. This was Fish and Rice Stories from Japan, and we'll see you again next week. Bye.